Sometimes the most dangerous secrets are hidden inside ordinary names. My first day at the Moretti Grand Hotel began at 6:30 in the morning. The lobby already glowed beneath towering crystal chandeliers while guests crossed polished marble floors carrying expensive luggage and hurried schedules. Everything looked larger than life. Larger than anything I had ever known. I adjusted the name badge pin to my blazer and followed the human resources manager through the lobby. My heart raced with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. After months of searching, I had finally found stable work. That alone felt like a miracle. You will be assisting guest services for the first few weeks, the manager explained. Learn the routines. Learn the people. Most importantly, learn the standards. I nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. The morning passed in a blur.
Phones rang constantly.
Guests arrived from every corner of the country. Elevators opened and closed without pause. I spent hours helping visitors, organizing reservations, and learning procedures. By noon my feet already hurt, but I could not stop smiling. This job mattered. For the first time in years my future felt stable. Around 1 o'clock, a message arrived requesting several employees to attend a brief orientation meeting in one of the executive conference rooms. I followed a small group through a series of elegant hallways until we entered a room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city beneath a bright autumn sky. I found a seat near the back and waited. Quiet conversations filled the room. Then everything changed. The doors opened. Instantly, every voice disappeared. Adrian Moretti entered without speaking. He moved calmly through the room, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that somehow made everyone else appear less important. His reputation preceded him everywhere. Owner, billionaire, business leader. A man whose name carried influence across the city. Yet what surprised me most was how quiet he seemed. He did not demand attention. Attention simply followed him. Adrian greeted several executives before taking a seat near the front. The orientation began. Department heads introduced themselves one by one. New employees followed. Eventually the manager pointed toward me. Why do you not introduce yourself? Every eye turned in my direction. I swallowed nervously before standing. My name is Olivia Bennett, I said. I am very grateful for the opportunity to work here. The moment the words left my mouth, something unexpected happened. Adrian Moretti stopped moving. It lasted less than a second. Most people would never have noticed, but I did. His eyes lifted immediately toward me. Not casually, not politely, intently, as though he had suddenly heard something impossible. The room continued normally. Another employee began speaking. Yet Adrian remained focused on me for several moments longer before finally looking away. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Employees returned to work. Conversations resumed. Life moved forward. But as I organized guest documents behind the reception desk later that afternoon, I noticed Adrian crossing the lobby with several executives. For a brief moment his gaze found mine again. The same expression remained there. Recognition, confusion, maybe even disbelief. Then he continued walking. I tried convincing myself I imagined everything. After all, why would a man like Adrian Moretti care about an employee he had met for less than 30 seconds? Yet high above the lobby, inside a private executive office overlooking the city, Adrian closed the door behind him and spoke only 6 quiet words. I want everything on Olivia Bennett. That evening the city glittered beneath thousands of lights while I rode the subway home. The excitement from my first day still lingered somewhere beneath my exhaustion. My feet ached. My shoulders felt heavy. Yet I could not stop thinking about the moment in the conference room. The way Adrian Moretti looked at me after hearing my last name. It made no sense. People like him did not notice people like me. By the time I reached my apartment, I had almost convinced myself I imagined the entire thing. Almost. My apartment sat on the 3rd floor of an aging brick building in Queens. It was small but comfortable. A place filled with practical furniture, old books, and family photographs. After heating leftovers for dinner, I settled onto the couch and opened a photo album that had belonged to my grandmother. Looking through it had become a habit over the years. Many of the photographs were faded. Some had no names written on the back. Others showed relatives I had never met. Family history always felt incomplete, like someone had torn pages from the beginning of the story. I stopped at a photograph of my father, Daniel Bennett. He stood beside a pickup truck, smiling toward the camera beneath a bright summer sky. I smiled back automatically. He passed away when I was young. Most of my memories came from stories my grandmother told me. Honest, kind, hardworking. Those were the words she used most often. I traced my finger along the edge of the photograph before closing the album. Across Manhattan, another evening was unfolding very differently. Adrian Moretti stood alone inside his private office overlooking the city skyline. A thick folder rested open across his desk. The first page displayed my employee file. Olivia Bennett. Age 24. Current address. Employment history. Education records. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. Yet Adrian continued turning pages. His expression grew more serious with every document. Finally, another man entered the office carrying a second folder. Older. Gray-haired. Trusted. The kind of person who had spent years working beside Adrian. You asked for deeper records, the man said quietly. Adrian accepted the folder without looking up. What did you find? The man hesitated. Not much. Adrian opened the folder. Several pages appeared almost empty. Missing records. Missing addresses. Missing historical information. Entire sections simply ended. That is impossible, Adrian said. The older man nodded. That was my reaction too. Silence settled across the office. Adrian studied the documents again. Most people would not have noticed the problem. But he did. A normal family leaves a trail. Addresses. Tax records. Property records. School records. Something. Yet the Bennett family seemed to disappear repeatedly throughout the last 20 years. Not completely. Just enough to leave gaps. Questions. Shadows. Adrian leaned back slowly. What about her father? The older man took a breath. That is where things become strange. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. Adrian lowered his eyes. His expression immediately changed. The page contained a photograph nearly 25 years old. A younger Daniel Bennett stood beside another man whose face had been partially obscured by age and damage. Yet the image itself was not what captured Adrian's attention. It was the date written beneath it. 24 years ago. Adrian stared at the photograph for a very long time. Memories surfaced behind his eyes. Memories he had not revisited in years. Finally he spoke. Find everything. The older man frowned slightly. Everything. Adrian looked back toward the city lights beyond the glass. Every record. Every connection. Every missing year. His voice remained calm. Controlled. But something deeper existed beneath the surface. Something personal. Because if this is the Bennett family I think it is, he said quietly, then somebody worked very hard to make them disappear. 3 days passed before I noticed anything unusual. Life at the hotel settled into a comfortable rhythm. I arrived before sunrise, greeted guests, answered questions, and learned something new every shift. The work was demanding, but I enjoyed it. For the first time in years, I felt as though I was building something stable. Yet small things began happening around me. Strange things. Subtle things. Things that were easy to dismiss individually. On Thursday morning, a manager I had never met stopped by my workstation simply to ask whether I needed anything. On Friday, another supervisor personally thanked me for work I had not even realized anyone noticed. Later that afternoon, my schedule was adjusted to give me better hours. Every change benefited me. None of it made sense. By the weekend, even my coworkers started noticing. You are becoming popular around here. One of them joked while organizing reservation files. I laughed. Trust me, nobody even knows who I am. But part of me was beginning to wonder. High above the hotel, another folder landed on Adrian Moretti's desk. Thicker than before. Filled with new information. He studied every page carefully. Most of the investigation had produced nothing unusual. Olivia Bennett appeared exactly as she claimed. No criminal history. No hidden financial records. No suspicious connections. An ordinary young woman living an ordinary life. Yet the deeper investigator searched into her family's history. The stranger the story became. Entire years remained missing. Addresses changed unexpectedly. Records ended without explanation. It was as though someone had spent decades carefully erasing pieces of a larger picture. Adrian turned another page. Then another. Finally he stopped. A single document rested before him. An old property record nearly 23 years old. The address immediately caught his attention. He recognized it. Not because the location mattered. Because of who once lived nearby. Adrian leaned back slowly. His expression darkened with memory. The office around him disappeared as old recollections returned. Summer sunlight. A small town. A man standing beside a pickup truck. Daniel Bennett. Adrian had not spoken that name aloud in over 20 years. Yet suddenly it felt impossible to escape. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The gray-haired investigator entered carrying another file. "We found something else." Adrian accepted it immediately. "What?" The investigator hesitated. "A gap." Adrian frowned. "Explain." The man opened the folder. Inside sat copies of public records. School records. Housing records. Employment records. Everything seemed normal until one specific period. "For nearly 3 years," the investigator said, "the family effectively disappears." Adrian studied the pages carefully. The gap was impossible to ignore. Before those years, records existed. After those years, records existed. During them, almost nothing. "That cannot happen accidentally," Adrian said quietly. "Exactly." Silence settled between them. Adrian's eyes drifted toward the city skyline beyond the glass. Somewhere below, thousands of people moved through ordinary lives, including Olivia Bennett, a woman who had no idea strangers were searching through fragments of her family's past. Did she know? Adrian finally asked. The investigator looked confused. "Know what?" Adrian lowered his gaze toward the documents. "That somebody erased her history." The older man considered the question. "If she does, she hides it very well." Adrian nodded slowly. Then his attention shifted toward a small notation written at the bottom of one page. A name. Not Olivia. Not Daniel. Another Bennett. His pulse quickened. Because he recognized that name too. The realization hit him instantly. For the first time since the investigation began, certainty replaced suspicion. He knew exactly where to look next. Adrian closed the folder. "Find Margaret Bennett." The investigator blinked. "The grandmother?" Adrian nodded. "She is the missing piece." Outside the office windows, evening shadows stretched across Manhattan. And somewhere inside a modest apartment in Queens, a dusty box filled with old family keepsakes sat untouched in the back of a closet, waiting for someone to finally open it. The following Sunday arrived with cold rain tapping softly against my apartment windows. For the first time all week I had nowhere to be. No schedules. No guests. No conference rooms. Just a quiet morning and a cup of coffee cooling beside me on the kitchen table. I spent most of the day cleaning. Laundry. Dishes. The ordinary routines that make a small apartment feel like home. By late afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the hallway closet. The same closet I had ignored for years. Boxes filled the upper shelves. Old blankets. Holiday decorations. Family keepsakes. My gaze settled on one particular box tucked into the back corner. Dust covered the lid. I immediately recognized it. My grandmother's box. She passed away 3 years earlier. After the funeral, I packed away many of her belongings because looking through them felt too painful. Since then the box remained untouched. Forgotten. Waiting. I pulled it down carefully and carried it into the living room. Rain continued falling outside while shadows lengthened across the apartment. For a long moment I simply stared at the box. Then I lifted the lid. The familiar scent of old paper and cedar drifted into the room. Photographs rested on top. Beneath them sat greeting cards, letters, and small keepsakes collected over decades. I smiled softly while sorting through them. Memories appeared everywhere. Birthday cards, family recipes, newspaper clippings, tiny pieces of a life now gone. Nearly an hour passed before I reached the bottom. That was when I noticed something unusual. A large envelope lay hidden beneath everything else. Unlike the other items, it looked intentionally concealed. My pulse quickened. The envelope contained no stamp, no address, only a single handwritten word. Bennett. I stared at it. Something about the handwriting felt important, familiar even though I could not explain why. Slowly, I opened the envelope. Several photographs slid onto my lap. First, nothing seemed remarkable. Old family pictures, smiling faces, gatherings, holidays. Then one image caught my attention immediately. My breath stopped. The photograph appeared older than the others, perhaps 25 years old. Standing near the center was my father, younger than I remembered him. Beside him stood another man, tall, dark-haired, wearing a simple button-down shirt. They appeared relaxed, comfortable, friends. I frowned. The face seemed strangely familiar. I looked closer, then closer again. Suddenly, realization hit me so hard I nearly dropped the photograph. It was Adrian Moretti, not the powerful businessman known throughout New York today. Younger, leaner, yet unmistakably him. My heart pounded. I flipped the photograph over. A date was written on the back. 24 years earlier. Beneath the date sat a short handwritten note. Friends become family when loyalty survives time. I stared at the words. Questions flooded my mind. Why had my father known Adrian Moretti? Why had nobody ever mentioned it? Why was this photograph hidden inside my grandmother's box? Across Manhattan, another discovery was unfolding. Inside a private vault beneath one of the Moretti properties, Adrian stood alone before a steel safe rarely opened. The combination lock clicked softly. The heavy door swung outward. Inside rested documents, photographs, and personal items collected across decades. Adrian reached toward a weathered leather folder buried near the back. He opened it carefully. The first photograph inside showed two young men standing beneath a summer sky. One was Adrian. The other was Daniel Bennett. Adrian stared at the image silently. 24 years had passed. Yet the memories remained vivid. Then something slipped from the folder and landed on the floor. A folded piece of paper. Adrian picked it up. His eyes widened almost immediately, because written across the top was a name he had not seen in more than 2 decades. Margaret Bennett. And beneath it, one sentence changed everything. If anything happens to us, protect the child. Sleep became impossible that night. The photograph lay on my kitchen table beside the note I found in my grandmother's box. Every few minutes, I picked them up again as though the answers might suddenly appear if I looked hard enough. My father and Adrian Moretti standing together, smiling, comfortable, friends. The image contradicted everything I believed about my family. My father had always seemed ordinary, the kind of man who fixed things around the house and helped neighbors shovel snow during winter storms. Nothing in my childhood suggested connections to one of the most powerful men in New York. Yet the photograph existed, which meant the connection existed too. Sometime after midnight, I finally drifted to sleep. Across the city, Adrian Moretti remained awake. The letter bearing Margaret Bennett's name rested open across his desk. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained clear. He had read the message several times already. Each reading revealed details he had overlooked before. The note was short, direct, written by Daniel Bennett more than 2 decades earlier. If anything happens to us, protect the child. Adrian closed his eyes. Memories returned immediately. Summer afternoons, long conversations, shared plans. Daniel Bennett had not been a wealthy man. He had not been famous. Yet there was something about him people trusted instinctively. He listened. He helped. He remembered promises. And 24 years earlier he had saved Adrian from making a mistake that could have changed everything. Adrian opened another folder resting beside the letter. This one contained older photographs. Most had not been viewed in years. One image showed Daniel standing beside a small lake holding a fishing rod. Another showed him helping repair a community center after a storm. Another showed a much younger Margaret Bennett smiling beside her family. Adrian studied each photograph carefully. Then he stopped. Tucked between 2 pages sat a folded newspaper clipping. The headline immediately caught his attention. Local volunteer honored for community service. The accompanying photograph showed Daniel Bennett accepting a small award. Adrian stared at the image. Then he noticed something unusual. Standing several feet behind Daniel was a woman. The photograph quality was poor, but the face remained recognizable. Adrian's pulse quickened. He knew exactly who she was. The realization arrived slowly at first, then all at once. For years he believed only Daniel mattered. But now another piece of the puzzle emerged. Another name connected to the missing years. He reached for the phone immediately. "I need information on someone," he said when the investigator answered. "Who?" Adrian looked at the newspaper clipping again. "Rebecca Hayes." Silence followed. "Are you sure?" Adrian nodded even though nobody could see him. "Very." Meanwhile, Monday morning arrived like any other workday. I returned to the hotel carrying the photograph inside my bag. Part of me wanted to forget everything. Another part could not stop thinking about it. Throughout the morning I greeted guests and answered questions, but my concentration drifted constantly. Around noon, I stepped into a quiet corridor near the executive offices while delivering documents. Voices echoed faintly from behind a partially open door. I recognized one of them immediately. "Adrian, how soon can you confirm it?" he asked. The response was too quiet to hear. Then Adrian spoke again. "If Rebecca Hayes is connected to the Bennett family, everything changes." My heart stopped. "Bennett?" I froze. For a moment I wondered whether I should keep walking. Instead I stood perfectly still. Then footsteps approached from inside the office. Panic flashed through me. I hurried away before anyone could see me. Yet one question followed me for the rest of the day. Who was Rebecca Hayes? And why would her connection to my family change everything? For the next 2 days the name refused to leave my thoughts. Rebecca Hayes. I repeated it during my commute, while helping guests, while lying awake at night staring at the ceiling. The name meant nothing to me, yet somehow it felt connected to everything. Every answer seemed to create 2 new questions. By Wednesday afternoon, curiosity finally won. After returning home from work, I pulled my grandmother's box onto the living room floor once again. Rain tapped softly against the windows while evening shadows stretched across the apartment. This time I searched more carefully. Every photograph, every letter, every newspaper clipping. Hours passed. Then, tucked inside an old recipe book, I found something unexpected. A small envelope sealed with yellowing tape. My pulse quickened immediately. The handwriting on the front belonged to my grandmother. "Open only if you need the truth." For several seconds I simply stared at the words. My grandmother had written them years ago, long before she passed away. Long before I found the photograph connecting my father to Adrian Moretti. Slowly I broke the seal. Inside rested a single folded letter. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Olivia, if you are reading this, then certain questions have finally found their way to you." I swallowed hard and continued. "There are things your father wanted hidden until the time was right. Not because he was ashamed, because he wanted you to have a normal life." My heart pounded. Every word pulled me deeper. The letter explained very little directly. Instead, it offered fragments, warnings, pieces of history. Yet one sentence immediately captured my attention. "If you ever hear the name Rebecca Hayes, know that she loved you very much." I froze. The room suddenly felt smaller. Rebecca Hayes. The same name I overheard inside Adrian's office. The same name connected somehow to my family. I continued reading. Faster. "Rebecca was your mother." Tears instantly blurred the page. My mother. The woman I barely remembered. The woman my family almost never discussed. Throughout my childhood, conversations about her always ended quickly. I had accepted it because loss hurts people differently. But now I understood there had always been more to the story. Much more. The letter continued. "Some people spent years protecting you. Your father. Your grandmother. Others too. When the time comes, listen before you judge. Not every secret was kept for the wrong reasons." Tears rolled down my cheeks. I lowered the letter slowly. Questions flooded my mind. Why had my mother been hidden from family stories? Why was Adrian investigating her name? And who exactly had spent years protecting me? Across Manhattan, another conversation was unfolding. Adrian sat inside a private conference room with the gray-haired investigator. A thin file rested on the table between them. "We found her," the investigator said quietly. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Alive? No, the answer came gently. But we found someone who knew her. Adrian leaned forward immediately. Who? The investigator opened the file. Inside sat a recent photograph of an elderly woman. Eleanor Brooks, former secretary at a nonprofit community foundation. Adrian studied the image carefully. Something about the name felt familiar. Then he remembered. 24 years earlier, Eleanor Brooks worked alongside Daniel Bennett and Rebecca Hayes. She had witnessed events nobody else could explain. The investigator slid another page forward. She asked for you by name. Adrian looked up sharply. She remembers me? The older man nodded. Apparently she has been waiting a very long time for this conversation. Silence filled the room. Adrian stared at the photograph. Then he stood. Arranged the meeting. Outside, the city lights slowly illuminated the skyline. And for the first time in more than 2 decades, someone who remembered the entire truth was finally ready to speak. 2 days later, I received an unexpected message near the end of my shift. The request came directly from the executive floor. For a moment I assumed there had been some mistake. Employees at my level did not receive invitations to private meetings with company leadership. Yet the message remained clear. Mr. Moretti would like to speak with you. My pulse immediately quickened. Questions rushed through my mind as I rode the elevator toward the top floor. The polished doors opened onto a quiet hallway lined with artwork and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Everything felt distant from the busy hotel below. A receptionist greeted me politely and directed me toward a conference room. When I entered, Adrian Moretti was already there. He stood near the window, hands resting behind his back as city lights flickered beyond the glass. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he turned. His expression seemed calm, thoughtful, almost hesitant. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Of course." I sat carefully across from him. The silence that followed felt unusual. Not uncomfortable, just heavy, as though he was deciding where to begin. Finally, Adrian placed a photograph on the table between us. My breath caught instantly. It was the same photograph I had discovered inside my grandmother's box. My father standing beside a younger Adrian Moretti. I stared at the image, then at him. "How do you have this?" Adrian lowered his gaze briefly. "Because I was there when it was taken." The room suddenly felt smaller. My pulse hammered inside my chest. "You knew my father." It was not a question. Adrian nodded slowly. "Very well." For several seconds I could not find words. Every assumption I carried for years seemed to shift beneath me. Why did nobody tell me? Adrian's expression softened. Because some people believed protecting you required silence. The answer sounded painfully familiar. My grandmother's letter. My father's hidden history. Rebecca Hayes. Everything seemed connected to the same secret. Before I could ask another question, the conference room door opened quietly. An elderly woman entered accompanied by one of Adrian's assistants. Her silver hair framed a kind face marked by age and experience. The moment she saw me, tears filled her eyes. She stopped walking entirely. One trembling hand rose toward her mouth. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. I stared back in confusion. Adrian stood. "Olivia, this is Eleanor Brooks." The woman never took her eyes off me. "You look exactly like her." My heartbeat accelerated. "Like who?" Eleanor's eyes glistened. "Rebecca." The name hung in the air between us. My mother. The woman whose story seemed buried beneath decades of silence. Eleanor slowly approached the table and sat down. For a few moments she simply looked at me. Not studying. Remembering. Finally, she reached into her purse and removed a small photograph. She slid it carefully across the table. My breath disappeared. The woman in the photograph looked astonishingly familiar. Blonde hair. Bright eyes. The same smile I saw every morning in the mirror. Tears immediately filled my eyes. "That is her," Eleanor said softly. "That is Rebecca Hayes." I stared at the photograph while emotions crashed through me. It felt like meeting a stranger and recognizing family at the same time. Eleanor smiled sadly. "Your mother was one of the kindest people I have ever known." The room remained silent except for the distant hum of city traffic beyond the windows. Then Eleanor looked toward Adrian. A quiet understanding passed between them. Something old. Something significant. When she turned back toward me, her expression changed. The sadness remained. But now something else appeared beside it. Concern. Olivia, she said carefully, there is a reason your family disappeared from public records. My heart nearly stopped. Eleanor folded her hands together. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. Your parents were not hiding from the world. They were hiding you from someone. The words settled over the room like a sudden winter storm. Nobody spoke for several seconds. I stared at Eleanor, trying to understand what she had just said. My parents were hiding me from someone. The idea sounded impossible. My father fixed fences, volunteered at community events, and spent weekends helping neighbors. My mother existed only in scattered memories and faded photographs. Nothing about their lives suggested secrets large enough to erase entire years from public records. Yet every discovery over the past week pointed toward the same conclusion. There had always been more to the story. Who were they hiding me from? I finally asked. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Adrian before answering. That is the question everyone spent years trying to avoid. Her voice remained gentle, careful, as though each word carried weight. She reached into her purse once more and removed a second photograph. This one showed my parents standing outside a small community center. My father smiled toward the camera. My mother stood beside him holding a toddler wrapped in a pink blanket. Me. Tears immediately filled my eyes. Eleanor placed the photograph beside the first. Your parents worked with several nonprofit organizations throughout the state, she explained. Community programs, housing projects, youth services. None of that surprised me. It sounded exactly like the father I remembered from family stories. They believed helping people mattered, Eleanor continued. And because of that, they met many important people. Adrian remained silent, listening, remembering. Eleanor looked toward him briefly before returning her attention to me, including Adrian. I glanced at him. He nodded slowly. Your father and I spent several years working together on community projects. The statement felt strange coming from a man whose name appeared on skyscrapers and business magazines. Yet the photographs proved it. Then what happened? I asked quietly. Adrian leaned forward. For the first time since this conversation began, he looked less like a powerful executive and more like someone carrying an old burden. Your parents discovered something, he said. Not a crime. Not anything dangerous. Something personal. Confusion crossed my face. Adrian continued. Someone close to your family wanted access to resources connected to several charitable foundations. When your parents realized those resources were meant for vulnerable families, they refused to support the plan. Eleanor nodded. Your parents believed integrity mattered more than convenience. The explanation surprised me. It was not some dramatic conspiracy. It was something simpler. A disagreement over values. A refusal to compromise principles. Exactly the kind of choice my father would have made. The situation created tension, Adrian said. Nothing more. But your parents worried that attention surrounding the dispute might eventually affect you. I looked down at the photographs. So they disappeared? Not completely, Eleanor replied. They simply stepped away. New address. Fewer public records. Less visibility. Suddenly the missing years made sense. The gaps. The relocations. The silence. My family had not been running from danger. They had been protecting privacy. Protecting normalcy. Protecting me. Tears slipped down my cheeks. Not from fear. From understanding. For years I believed pieces of my history were missing because nobody cared enough to preserve them. Now I realize the opposite was true. Those pieces were hidden because people cared too much. Eleanor reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. Your mother loved you more than anything. I swallowed hard. And my father? Adrian answered before Eleanor could. His voice remained steady, but emotion softened every word. Your father spent his entire life making sure you would have opportunities he never had. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Healing silence. Then Adrian opened a small folder resting beside him. Inside sat several photographs and letters carefully preserved through the years. He slid them toward me. These belong to your parents. I stared at them in disbelief. You kept all of this? Adrian nodded. I made a promise a long time ago. His gaze settled briefly on the photograph of my father. And some promises deserve to be kept. The following week felt different. Not because my life had suddenly changed on the outside. I still arrived at work before sunrise. I still greeted guests. I still rode the subway home each evening. From a distance, everything appeared exactly the same. But inside something had shifted. For the first time, the empty spaces in my family history no longer felt empty. They were filled with faces, stories, choices, sacrifices. I spent hours reading the letters Adrian had preserved all those years. Some came from my father. Others came from my mother. Every page revealed another piece of the people they had been. They wrote about ordinary things, community events, volunteer projects, dreams for the future, hopes for their daughter, me. More than once, tears blurred the ink as I read. Not because the letters were sad, because they were full of love. The kind of love that survives long after people are gone. One Saturday afternoon, Adrian invited me to visit a small community center outside the city. The building had been renovated recently, but much of its original character remained. Children laughed in nearby classrooms. Volunteers prepared supplies for local families. The atmosphere felt warm and familiar. Adrian stood beside me as we walked through the hallways. Your parents spent a lot of time here, he said quietly. I looked around. Photographs lined several walls. Community events, fundraisers, volunteer programs. Then I stopped walking. Near the center of one display hung a photograph I had never seen before. My mother and father stood together beneath a summer sky. They looked happy, not because life was perfect, because they were together. Beneath the photograph rested a small plaque, dedicated to those who believed service matters more than recognition. I stared at the words for a long moment. Adrian remained silent beside me. Finally, I turned toward him. You never forgot them. He looked at the photograph. A faint smile appeared. Some people leave a permanent mark on your life. The answer carried more emotion than explanation. Yet somehow I understood. Weeks later, winter arrived in New York. Snow covered rooftops and sidewalks while holiday lights illuminated the city after dark. One evening, I stood outside my apartment holding the final letter my father ever wrote. I had saved it for last. The paper felt fragile in my hands. The handwriting remained steady. Olivia, if you ever read this, then life moved forward exactly as we hoped it would. Do not spend your years wondering what secrets were hidden from you. Spend them becoming the person you were meant to be. The words struck deeper than anything else I had read. Not because they answered questions, because they released them. My father never wanted his story to become my burden. He wanted it to become my foundation. I folded the letter carefully and looked toward the snow-covered street below. For the first time, peace replaced curiosity. The investigation had begun with a name. It uncovered photographs, letters, missing years, and forgotten promises. Yet the greatest discovery was much simpler. My family had never been defined by secrets. They had been defined by love. Across the city, Adrian Moretti stood inside his office overlooking Manhattan. The skyline glowed beneath a winter sunset. On his desk rested a single photograph of two young men standing beneath a summer sky more than 2 decades earlier. Daniel Bennett smiled toward the camera. Adrian picked up the photograph one final time before placing it inside a drawer and quietly closing it. The promise had finally been fulfilled. Not through money, not through power, through memory, through loyalty, through keeping faith with people who mattered. Outside, the first snowflakes of the evening drifted across the city lights. And somewhere between the past and the future, a forgotten family story finally found its way home. Some names disappear from records. The right people never forget them.